Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar about knowledge productivity in the age of AI. My name is Petula Adenburg, and I'm part of ClearPeople's marketing team. This session is being recorded and will be made available later today. While you're waiting for the event to start, please can I ask you to fill in the form. You can find the link in the Q&A panel that I've just posted and will take you to a poll. During the webinar, please do ask questions through the Q&A panel. We will answer some of them during the session or towards the end during Q&A. And now I am pleased to hand over to Stephen Bedford, ClearPeople's Product Director of Atlas.
Welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm delighted to say this afternoon we've got some what I think are exceptional guests and panelists today. Stuart, Joe and Gabriel, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and your firm in that order.
Okay, I think you've got a low bar, Steve, in terms of exceptional. But anyway, so my name's Stuart Whittle. I'm Chief Technical and Innovation Officer at Weightmans. Weightmans is a top 40 UK law firm, and I'm going to be one of your four middle-aged, middle-class white guys today, and I'm going to play authentically the part of the person who knows least about our subject matter today.
Thank you, Joe.
Wonderful. Joe Hilger. I'm the COO and one of the co-founders of Enterprise Knowledge, which is a knowledge management consultancy that has grown to be one of the largest KM consultancies in the world. Gabriel?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Pleased to be here with you guys. It'll be interesting, I'm sure. I'm one of two co-founders in ClearPeople and work closely alongside Steve in our product.
Thank you very much. So knowledge productivity in the age of AI. I thought we'd start by saying knowledge productivity. Gabriel, what do we mean when we use that term?
Oh, thank you very much for handing over to me already. Well, I mean, what we are talking about when we talk about knowledge productivity is really it's a different thing to knowledge management. Knowledge management is is potentially part of it, but we're really looking wider than what you would traditionally have looked at in the old days, should we say, when just looking at knowledge management. Knowledge management in a traditional sense typically looks at the sort of highly curated information. You would have things like best practice or policies, procedures, that kind of stuff. So it's something that's gone through a process. Someone has spent a lot of time on it, and it still has high value. The problem with it is that it is a very, very small percentage of the overall sort of pool of data that's there. So everything else is not really considered as knowledge on a day-to-day basis and from a traditional knowledge management perspective. And therefore, you get all these questions, wish I had known, I wasted time looking for it, etc. So when we talk about knowledge productivity, we're really just talking about bringing more things into the fold, bringing more things in front of people in the flow of their work, making them more productive with knowledge. Some of that knowledge might not be the top tier, the level 1, the gold graded, whatever it's called, but it's knowledge in its own right by virtue of being there and being relevant to whatever you might be doing. And Atlas sort of straddles across these tiers and reduces the amount of undiscovered information, undiscovered knowledge. And for that, we of course also leverage certain tooling, as you can see there on the right. And this is a very, very interesting space to be in, of course, when talking about AI, to identify and find this, but also potentially to create more knowledge. So it's really all about all that, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much. So Stuart, in your firm, there is a lot of information flowing between the relevant individuals and business units and so on. In your world, what does Nirvana look like for you and your firm in respect to how knowledge gets created, how you consume it, and really more importantly, how you make that valuable?
So for me, my sort of wish list is, in terms of Nirvana, is an automated curation of the things in the organization that could potentially be regarded as knowledge, i.e. something that we've created somewhere which might be useful to someone else, by first identifying it as knowledge in its wider sense, as Gabriel just touched on. And then I want that knowledge, in inverted commas, automatically and accurately tagged in accordance with our various taxonomies, so that those tags in turn can be used to create a hierarchical navigation structure to the knowledge, and also for the purpose of searching and filtering. I then would like that knowledge to be automatically retired without any intervention when it's out of date, or for example, when the law changes. I'd like it stored in a repository that enables the knowledge to be found easily. And if not found, the end user is confident that the reason they can't find anything is because the knowledge doesn't exist, not because they can't find it. I'd like that knowledge to be federated with external sources of knowledge, where the external taxonomies of the external knowledge source are mapped to our internal taxonomies. So you're searching for the same thing with the same terms. Ideally, in pure Nirvana, I want that knowledge to be pushed to the knowledge workers at the point of need within their existing workflow, without them having to interrupt their workflow and go elsewhere to find what they need in a way that's contextually relevant. I'd also like a load of discrete structured data extracted out of that knowledge that I can then do something with. I'm not sure what the something is, but at least if I've got that structured data, that gives me a starting point. And then I would also finally like metadata about the knowledge to help us understand actually what people are doing with the knowledge and what they find useful. So that's my kind of nirvana for knowledge and knowledge management and knowledge reuse.
Glad this is being recorded, by the way, because that was a lot. But that was very useful. And Joe, you know, from your point of view, that list of ideal outcomes, how far away are we from that? I mean, you know, many of those things have been those capabilities have existed for a while, but some of them most definitely haven't. So, you know, how far away from that nirvana do you think we actually are today? You know, are we close? Are we getting there? Do you think it'll happen?
First off, Stuart, that's quite a list. And it shows the pain points that people are going through, everything from being able to find more of your content. And Gabriel, you talked about highly curated expertise, best practices, lesson learned. They're often the least important things because they're the things everyone knows. Yeah. What Stuart's talking about is as you go down this channel, how do you find the stuff that you don't easily find and need and know? And how do you do it in a repeatable fashion and make sure that it's accurate? And I think that's a big piece. So I don't have all the list. I was quickly scrambling, writing some of it down. But the taxonomies and auto tagging, we're in a much better place today. That area has really matured. There's machine learning embedded in it, and there's a lot of interesting ways to handle that. That's a good place. When you talk about working on platforms that help ease the organization of it, because it's not just about tags, it's about having a structure that makes sense, right? Because not everyone searches, people browse as well, and you need a better understanding of your content. For that, and I'm going to give a little plug to Atlas here, I think it's a wonderful tool to overlay this stuff and create an information architecture or structure on M365 that you wouldn't have other ways. So some of that stuff we're doing well.
Yep.
As we dive into, you talked about kind of automatically getting rid of stuff that's no longer relevant or no longer aligns with the law. There's talk about that. It's still today mostly a manual process. I think as you do tagging and you create some of this, as you create some better structure, you can do it. For example, if a law changes and if you've been able to tag all the content that's relevant or associated with that law, you should then be able to query and bring that up and say, does the stuff still work, right? But that remains a manual process and we have to grow from there. The last area you talked about is starting to work outside of our box. And this is really neat. And this is where all this ChatGPT and OpenAI and Cortex, all this stuff is coming into play. Knowledge management is not just about managing or using the knowledge within your four walls. It's about using that in conjunction with the knowledge and information that's out there publicly and really taking that to the next level. And that's the thing we're just starting to get into. We've got things like knowledge graphs, we've got ChatGPT, and some of these other tools that are going to make that a reality. So tagging, we're getting there. We're pretty close. Getting rid of old content, we got work to do. I don't think that's still pretty manual. Starting to work with external content and breaking down the walls of, hey, my knowledge is wider than just what's in my building. That's the exciting place where we're making huge leaps and it's growing quickly.
And in respect to AI, though, I mean, there's a lot of excitement in the market about ChatGPT. Obviously, we've got Microsoft Copilot, to be available this year, assuming they stick to the dates that are being mentioned. Sure, from your point of view, though, we're certainly starting to hear a bit of pushback, not just from organisations, but at a political level about the use of AI. Do you think users themselves, though, and particularly in law firms, do you think they're feeling pressure to use AI? Is there a sense that if they don't use it, then they're not actually maximising their worth to a firm, and that there's a feeling that they need to leverage this technology?
As one of our, as I said, middle-aged white blokes who isn't an expert on AI, to me, it depends what you mean by AI, but in its wider sense, people are already using it, albeit they may not necessarily realize it. But if the question is more around generative AI generally and large language models specifically, God, I hope not. We've already had a report last week that I saw in the Times, but it's been more widely reported, of the lawyer in the US who used ChatGPT to generate his pleadings, and it shows you what happens when you think ChatGPT is a primary source of law, for example. And the most striking bit about it for me, in terms of how it was reported anyway, is that the lawyer seemed to think that it was all okay because it had asked ChatGPT whether it had made up its sources, which it had, and ChatGPT said it hadn't, so that's okay then. To my mind, I think that the issue that you've got is the hype for all of this is off the scale, at least in terms of my own personal social media bubbles, and all of that hype reminds me a lot of these sort of, it's almost historical, or it's recent history around blockchain, crypto, NFTs, remember them, Web 3.0, and all of that kind of stuff. And I confess, as I said, I'm not an expert. I'm not quite sure where I am on it. I mean, at a philosophical level, there are things that GPT-4 does that is remarkable. There's a paper I read produced by a number of academics. It's a long paper, 150 pages of it, who were just looking to see what it could do and what it could not do. And it seemed to be capable of doing things that looked like it had to have some sort of semantic concept about the world. One of the silly things they asked him to do was to produce some code to produce a stick man from the letters Y and H, and it produced a stick man from the letters of Y and H, and then to put shirt and trousers on the stick person, which it did. And so in order to do that, somewhere in there, it must have had a concept that the shirt goes on a body and trousers go on legs, and an H looks a bit like legs and the Y looks like a body and arms. And yet, when you listen to the people who have engineered it, what they're saying is it can't possibly have any semantic knowledge. All it's doing is has intuited, and I use that in inverted commas, the syntactic rules of language. So context of my firm, context of legal profession, and ChatGPT, GPT-4, whatever, Bard, whatever you want to talk about, is simply technology. And from my perspective, you go back to basics, and my starting point about technology generally is, and in this case, in this context, what is the problem to which a large language model that makes stuff up and which time horizon ends at 2021 is the solution? And right now, I'm not wholly sure, and that may be a complete failure of my imagination, but I don't see a vast number of use cases that would make me feel, in the context of your question, Steve, people need to be worried about using their jobs. I mean, at the moment, what's lacking from a lawyer's perspective, previous example accepted, is provenance. They need to be able to validate the source of the information and then be able to understand that source in context. And again, to be honest, right now, in terms of worrying about the things that they need to be used and not using, I'd rather they worry about understanding and using effectively the technology that they already have at their disposal.
Yeah, interesting answer. I mean, from my perspective, I think there is no doubt that this tech is going to get better. Yeah, the one thing we know is that technology does tend to improve at differing rates. But assuming we do get to a point where the source of information can be trusted, that the outputs can be trusted, is there still a risk though that people become lazy? People don't actually try and understand the content that is out there, and they simply ask a question to a bot to get the answer without having a deep understanding. It's a bit like having a calculator and saying I don't need to understand maths anymore. Is there a risk of that?
Yeah, but it's no different than doing a search and this, and picking the first bit of information that comes up in your search as the truth. One of the things that, again, it seems to me that what large language models are good at is producing content for things you already know the answer to. you have to be able to exercise a degree of skepticism and make sure you understand what the source is. And to your absolute point, Steve, my analogy was, if you give me a hammer, I'm more likely to hit my thumb than a nail. And it's a bit like the lawyer in the US. You gave him a tool and he pretty much hit his thumb with it.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Gabriel, technically speaking, there's all of this noise, and some of it I'm sure will be hype, but there is some real technology, coming along. Organizations though have finite budgets. A lot of this has not yet been priced. Assuming that the tech is good and it can deliver value. Where do you direct your budgets? Today,
Yeah.
where do you direct your budgets in 6 months' time? Is it all eggs in one basket type of scenario?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to Stuart's point, you as an organization, you would want to do something with this technology rather than just relying on the out of the box experience, and you'd want to do things like combining the outcomes with your own data, feeding it in with your own data, so you start getting really valuable outcomes, like analyze all this data for me and summarize it, but it's my data that I'm feeding in rather than just looking at something generic. So of the companies that are sort of considering AI seriously, I think we can split them sort of into two categories, right? There are those with the few percent, those with large budgets, large tech teams, large R&D teams, where an incremental improvement to specific process or whatever provides them with a great return, maybe puts them ahead of the rest of the market. There are typically just a few players in the market, maybe the large financial institutions or large insurers, and from an AI perspective, some of them, they have actually been investing into this for a while. They have been, and actually they might have been doing this for decades, right? So they have been exploring what's possible, and they start getting now a very, very good sense of what is possible. And they have typically not put their eggs in one basket, right? So they don't want to rely just on Google or just on Microsoft, and they have been R&Ding, they have been using best of breed, and they'll be cooking up their own concoction of AI. But they are the few percent of companies. There aren't that many that have got that. So for the rest of us, it's a different story. Most companies don't have a few million just lying around just to do some fine tuning of some millions of records, right? So instead, I think, there is an argument for backing one general architecture, short, medium term. That's probably the best spend of the money, but that does not mean that you're necessarily, should we say, locked in with Microsoft as your OpenAI, and then you're stuck with that forever. But you're maybe betting on an overall framework. You're betting on an architecture which gives you some room for maneuver. And so from our perspective with Atlas, we're integrating with OpenAI through Azure, but providing a governed approach to all of that, which means, you're using a private instance of your LLMs, but you can actually leverage that infrastructure to an extent with other AIs, with open source, with embeddings, with plugins, using other sources of data or even other AIs over time. So we think for the majority of large organizations, medium-sized to large organizations, having sort of solid information management and knowledge management combined with an approach to AI probably gives you the best balance of budget versus outcomes. And hey, if you are starting to go into this with a good solid base of information, you are probably already a forward-thinking, innovative organization, I would say.
And that goes back to some of the points that Stuart raised earlier, and I think Joe embellished, is that having that information architecture in place, having that mechanism for classifying data is a solid framework to then build on. I mean, again, in your firm though, Stuart, can you see any use cases today for AI? Are there obvious places, some of which you may already be using in certain areas, but are there some obvious enhancements that you think, as a firm, you need to be working on today? You need to be delivering over the next 6 to 12 months?
There's a few different questions there. I mean, we are already using things that are badged as AI in terms of machine learning, predictive analytics and the like. But in the context of what we're talking about in large language models, having said there aren't very many use cases, there is an obvious use case, and I'm not unique in thinking of this, but is improving the functionality of our internal chatbot, which we call Bailey. Bailey was one of our first experiments in our innovation team, which we built a few years ago, and we built a chatbot interface with Microsoft's Q&A backend. To an extent it worked, but like all chatbots of its generation, it's pretty limited in terms of its ability to parse the questions, understand what those questions meant, and return the right answer. And I can see a nice use case, very similar to the way Bing Chat works, whereby in combination with Microsoft's cognitive search ability, we can take a question, use the cognitive search capability across the documents in our Azure tenancy that we are storing in Atlas, in effect, pass the most relevant documents to Microsoft's OpenAI infrastructure for it to provide a summary, and then reference the document it has summarized, so that you can go and check that actually that's the right document. That's actually the document you're looking for and the answer that you were looking for. And in principle, I think that would, as a starting place, certainly for us, is that would work really well for questions around our numerous internal policies. That was one of the original use cases for our first version of a chatbot, and it would also, I think, be helpful if we could use it. It's a perennial problem in law firms, is who knows what, who's the expert in. So if we could access our previous tenders, our chambers submissions, our legal 500 directory submissions, our website content, our LinkedIn content, and actually be able to ask natural language question of who knows something about aviation in Bulgaria, for example, and have it do the search, pass the documents to OpenAI, and then have a summary with some references explaining where that summary came from. I think that would be a nice use case.
And Joe, how much of this are you seeing in your world? I mean, Stuart has a very clear perspective in terms of where AI, might be and its capabilities are. But are you getting inbound requests at the moment? Are you having use cases thrust upon you?
Yes, actually, sometimes the requests are, my boss said, I need AI. Actually, no, AI was a while ago in the broader term, but in the more near term, hey, we've got to do something with this chat GPT. I need to show something in the next thing you build for us, or next piece of work you do for us. So can you give me something? There's no use case. It's just, I was told I had to do something. It strikes me, Stuart, you've given this real thought, and you've really thought about where it fits and what it doesn't. And I wrote down some places where you can use the LLMs more, and it struck me that if you're saying, when can I use these really cool LLMs, I want to have a place that has a tolerance for errors or ambiguity. So Stuart, you talked about, can I can do an internal search, and it's okay if it's not perfect because they'll look for more, but it helps. So that's good. You want a place with strong KM. I love the slide that's up here. We want to get as organized as we can, because garbage in and leads to garbage out stays the same. If you're not managing your information, you're in trouble. I think the amount of dynamism, if what you're looking at changes on a daily basis, that's probably going to be problematic, because you're going to have historical information that's hard to manage. And then the last thing, and I actually am seeing a lot with this, and I think this is actually going to help with these LLMs a lot, is people are using knowledge graphs to create and define semantics that can be fed into the LLM, so the information it's getting is the better information with a better understanding of what the people, places, and things might be that they're talking about. And so where I'm seeing some of this happen is by getting some things controlled, by understanding the proper use cases, and then putting in, say, a knowledge graph in place that helps define this stuff, it's going to make these things work better and more reliably, right? We all have junk data out there. So,
and with all of these things, though, change. How do firms actually go about adopting these things? And I think if we bring it back to some of the basics that you spoke about, Stuart, which is actually doing some of the, building the foundations first, having a proper taxonomy in place, having proper data structures that can be queried, that can be searched, and then having this layer of AI on top. how do you actually go about implementing some of this? I was at a Gartner conference a few weeks back, and one of the big themes was, change fatigue. And I know you've spoken about that before, Stuart, but, we've been through 3 years of enormous change. Is there a sense that, is this too much? Can you see blockers to this?
Yeah. It's sort of, this is much wider than simply AI as a general proposition. And, the toothpaste is out. As I said, the tube is out of the toothpaste, but the toothpaste is out of the tube right now. The big blocker of adoption of anything organizationally is the pace of change. It is brutal at the moment, and it's not going to get any better, particularly when you're looking in terms of software releases. Just look at Microsoft Build last month. I mean, the number of things they have just thrown out there, it's hugely difficult to keep on top of, and that's on the part of the IT people who like IT, who the challenge as well laid on top of that is organizationally we have increasingly limited control over new releases and features, having all bought into software as a service, and these come out thick and fast. And it does present a real issue for large organizations and how they help their people get used to this constant change. And then layer on, we're going to ask you to use some generative AI on the top of it. It's just really hard. If you, trivial example, but I don't know whether you had a look at Microsoft's latest Microsoft Outlook client. I like IT. They have managed to release a Microsoft Outlook client which has less functionality than the existing client. In particular, you can't filter by the columns anymore. And if I release that to my organization, it will cause mayhem. You've removed something that people use on a daily basis and made their lives harder. And, don't get me wrong, it's always true that software companies end of life solutions, but even the pace of end of lifing is getting quicker. And there's a real struggle at the moment, so certainly with the peers that I talk to in the legal industry, as to there's so much change, that there are so many things coming up and then end of lifing, and people are almost paralyzed into doing anything at all because they don't want to start something and realize in 6 months' time the thing that they built their thing in is no longer going to be supported. Or similarly, they don't want to start building in something and discover in 3 months' time actually the functionality that they've just spent 3 months building is already there. So it's really challenging right now to know where to start, to know where to begin.
Gabriel, from obviously from our point of view, we're a product company. We always think about how we can simplify the end user experience around some of these things. How do we go about making these these activities simpler? How do we go about actually making these tools easier to adopt? I know we speak a lot about sort of being able to enable users to automate the creation of knowledge and so on and so forth.
Well, you're our product director, so you should know the answer.
Well, I can't talk. I've got to get somebody else to.
But yeah, I mean, of course, from an Atlas perspective, it's all about sort of consolidating the experiences and making sure that users have a consistent way of working. But of course, the thing that is on a lot of people's mind right now is how can we take advantage of something like Copilot, which we believe is potentially a game changer in the way that you can create documentation, can create knowledge, can have knowledge that is sort of drafted for you, and then focus your time on improving that outcome, right? So, we often in the last few months, we've been asked quite a lot about Copilot. How's that going to affect? How is that going to impact the quality of my outcomes, but also what do I need to get ready for that? And I thought, you probably saw it was flicking in and out of these here before. I thought I'd just sort of bring this up. There is a blog on this, and I've just literally ripped the diagrams from Microsoft, but I think this is super interesting from that sort of how can we help the users create information in the flow of their work, right? So the idea around Copilot, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the Microsoft apps that you do this. There are APIs that are coming to life now in the next half year, but the idea really is that the user carries out an action or asks for something. And as sort of Stuart described it before, there's a risk if you just ask that to ChatGPT, you're going to get something that's relatively low value back, maybe of no relevance to you whatsoever. And the job of Copilot really is taking that prompt and then turn it into something that that contains relevance and contains information that is relevant to you. You can imagine if I asked the question, something like, help me summarize our employee benefits with headings for each of our locations and using our employee handbook and benefit policy documentation, for instance. If you said that, ChatGPT would go ? Have no clue what you're talking about, and it'll tell you that. But in this case here, if you were to ask that question, what's really cool and what's really interesting about this is how you then can bring that prompt into Copilot, which then uses your prompt to construct a search, fire that search into Graph, get the information back, reconstruct that whole prompt with information from your system that you can see as an end user, right? So this is still information you can see like a search, and then take that information and pass that over to the large language model. Now, this large language model here is still private to you. We're not going out to the public ChatGPT. It's private to you, right? So in your Azure OpenAI instance, etc. You then get the answer back nicely formed, because that's what the LLM does. It helps you to structure this into a way. It doesn't add, more of your own knowledge to it. It does not have access to it, right? But it structures the response for you, brings it back to you. Maybe it does some additional post-processing, say, oh, actually, I should add some additional information, some additional documents or whatever, and then feeds it back to you. So in the end, at the end of this process, to answer your question, Steve, you will then effectively have let's call it a decent draft of that sort of overview of the benefits. And you can continue your work from there. And the whole thing is about raising that bar, so you spend less time on just gathering information that's already there and using the technology to do that.
I mean, I'm assuming Copilot, Stuart, will be a piece of technology that you will be considering. I'm guessing at the very least. But are you concerned about governance at the moment? We hear a lot of concerns around how are we governing the use of this, how are we governing how this is used and where it is used, so on and so forth. Is that definitely a concern for you?
So short answer is yes, of course, governance is an issue for us. I mean, longer answer is we're a heavily legislated and regulated profession. We have a lot of governance that we need to have in place, from checks around source of funds, know your client, money laundering, making sure we issue client care letters, transparency around costs, and there's of course our overriding obligation to keep confidential the affairs of our clients, and then laid on top of that the obligations from GDPR. Now, how we deal with that within Weightmans is we have a risk and compliance team whose job is to govern all of this. Our overall approach to risk and governance generally is overseen by our audit and risk committee. And in terms of the use of technology, particularly where it's new and novel, particularly where we are making use of data in its wider sense, we have formal processes in place that look at how we deal with new solutions. We do a lot of due diligence of suppliers. So and one of the things that we do as well is we go through quite a detailed, slightly painful, if I'm to be honest, but it's all good stuff, a data privacy impact assessment for everything we do. In order to do that, though, it's getting increasingly hard to understand what's happening with your data, what's actually going to happen with your data, where it's going, what's going to be used. And clearly there's a difference between using the public version of OpenAI and Microsoft's OpenAI Azure infrastructure, and we need to be able to understand that to enable us to make informed decisions around governance. We are looking at our policy around governance of generative AI, and in particular ChatGPT, and we've been talking with you, actually, with ClearPeople, about looking as to whether we can use your Prometheus, which is basically your API into ChatGPT, and then use the governance that's built into our instance of Atlas that we call Nimbus, to actually give us some governance over who accesses it, how they access it, and give us an audit trail of what people have been doing with it.
And are you seeing this, Joe, in your role? I mean, obviously, as Stuart just mentioned, they work in a very highly regulated industry. So are you seeing the same concerns more generally?
We are seeing it all over the place, and there's different aspects of it, right? There's the governance of how people are using technologies, and Stuart, you talked a bit about that, but I think I actually want to spend a little more time talking about how you make sure that your handling risk and compliance for all of your information assets. Right.
Yeah.
We have a project we're working on right now. It's with one of the largest financial institutions in the world, and we have 5 people defining an ontology that will define the structure of information and map it across the entire organization so they can dynamically identify information or activities that are captured digitally that are problematic and affect compliance so they can proactively go after this. And when we have 5 people doing this for as long as a year, this is a massive project and it's super important. Now, that's one extreme, but on all of our clients, we're seeing it. And then there's something that Gabriel brought up that I think is so important. Gabriel, you talked about using the information that our customers have to enhance that LLM and create something that's personalized. And by the way, more recent and current. The problem is you have a lot of information that doesn't fit that role. What about that document that was not? What about that document that's wrong? What about that thing that no longer matches the current law? How do you make sure that Copilot doesn't pick that up? How do you make sure it doesn't give back the wrong information just because you have, shall we say, garbage that shouldn't be there? And so I think this will be super important. Organizations are seeing it from a risk and compliance standpoint overall, but what's going to happen is as these new tools and these dynamic tools that are exposing information in a more automated and faster fashion, we're going to wake up. And Stuart, you talked about this. Hey, I got this product and it upgraded 3 times. Well, guess what? One of those upgrades is going to expose all that information that you wished you didn't expose. And so I think it's big now and it's going to get bigger and be more of a problem as technology enables more access to information.
Interesting. Okay, we're 37 minutes in now.
Steve, you know what? Let me just show the poll results, and then because there are some questions that came in. Of course, we can now pick up on that came in during the registration. But let me just put these poll results back here. So we got a few more results, which is interesting to see. Yeah, so fairly evenly split across those top 3 there. I would love some more poll results in for whoever is on. It would be amazing to get your feedback on this, but thank you so far.
Yeah, almost a perfectly even split, which is a shame. I normally like something where you've got 67% and 2%.
Yeah,
a bit more interesting, but
it's all hard.
Probably not. Saying. It's all hard. Yeah, it's all hard. Okay. Yeah, we did have, as you say, Gabriel, we did have some questions. We also had some questions asked on the sign-ups. There was an interesting one, Joe, actually here for you. How can AI help the healthcare industry in practice when complete digitalization has not actually been reached yet? So I'm guessing here there's a lot of paper records still in play, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, digitization in the healthcare industry has many challenges, right? The HIPAA regulations are so hard and so complex. It's scary to go there, and it's hard. I actually had a partner, a digital asset management system, that said, if we're dealing with patient information, I'm not signing up for it. We don't have the tools to match HIPAA. So you start there and you say, oh wow, this is hard. But having said that, you do have great information sources, both data and content, that are not just patient records, that are not things that aren't yet scanned, that have value. You have conversations between people, you have results, and even public information that you can pull together. So what I would say is, don't focus on what you don't have, focus on what's out there, right? For us in the States, NIH has a bunch of open information you can get and augment other stuff. We've done work with pharmas that have said, show us what we have and know, and used information that's from their product databases, from external sources, et cetera, and pull that together and start to stitch that into something valuable. So it's doable. Just don't get caught up on what you can't do. Think about what you could do and get creative. And we do have some great success stories there.
Yep.
Steve, yeah, there is another question. Maybe you can take that one since you are product director. So there was a question that came in where we would like I'd like understanding of how AI can help my people be informed and instructed on what they need to know and do and when to do it. Now, the end of that is quite interesting and feeds into what we've been talking about without in-depth knowledge of tools and processes, right? So I think this is an interesting one where you're sort of abstracting the end user from the underlying pain of the tools and the processes.
Yeah. Well, I think, in time, actually using natural language is clearly going to be one way of helping them, where the actual interface enables them to use language that they are familiar with without necessarily understanding the language of the technology that they're using. That's clearly one. I think the other thing is, though, is that, and this comes back to a lot of the work that you do, Joe, is increasingly there is a requirement to be able to properly categorize content. Yep, you've got to be able to categorize your content fully in order for any machine to try and give you the best answer, and you've also got to try and categorize it in the context of the role or the task that you're performing. And again, that comes back to something you were saying, Stuart, right at the beginning of this, and that's really the key thing. Whatever tool I'm using, it's got to have some context, to it. The task that I'm doing has to be supported in the context of the place that I'm in. So if I'm working in a team, if I'm working in a collaboration space, working on a legal matter, and I ask a question, I expect the response to have some sense of the context that I'm currently working in, and that's what we're doing from a product development point of view. That's something that we increasingly look at and we increasingly strive to achieve. I do think, though, one of the very specific AI task we're looking at right now is about being able to find expertise, actually being able to ask a question of the machine and it knows where to place that answer. Again, you used example questions earlier, Stuart. I need to know something about this and let's say I ask the question of, I've got a query in respect to pricing, right? Now, unless the machine has some sort of context, it knows who I am, what my role is in the business. How does it know that my pricing query is about a product that we sell, a product that we might want to buy, just a general query, about, prices in the marketplace? So you've got to be able to feed it with context. And that's really one of the key things that we're looking at, is how we can embellish these prompt engineering obviously is becoming a very well-known phrase, how we can automate that prompt engineering for the user. Because, trust me, most users are not going to, take a degree in prompt engineering. They just want to use the language that they're familiar with.
And we've just been educating them the last 20 years how to make a search prompt, right? So
correct. Yeah. Stop
doing that. Yeah. Start using natural language. But I think to close off, and I think maybe one final thing for Stuart, there was one more question that came in, which was, how can mid-sized law firms start to take steps on the AI adoption journey? Maybe just maybe your top 3 things that you're thinking about. Where are you looking at starting, Stuart, if at all?
Sorry, you have heard of rather a lot from me, but it's not quite the answer I think you're expecting, Gabriel, but it comes back to sort of the point I was making earlier on in the session. It's just technology, in inverted commas. When I say just, it's very clever, but it's just technology. So for me, it's no different to an approach to any technology. It doesn't sit in a vacuum. It's not an end in and of itself. It is, as I previously said, it's just simply a tool. So you got to start with really understanding the problem or problems that you are trying to solve. And then you need to decide actually whether AI of whatever flavor, whether it's LLM or something else, might be able to help solve that problem. And then you've got to experiment to see if your hypothesis is true, because sometimes it doesn't help, as we've discovered over the last 5 years and experimenting with all sorts of things. But again, I think Joe's touched on this as well. If you're going to start trying to integrate your large language models with to make the knowledge that you have in your organization more accessible, then you kind of got to sort the basics out first. You need to ensure everything, your data is up to date, it's current, and you don't have the garbage in, garbage out that Joe was talking about. Like I say, that's why I kind of talk about the hype sort of earlier on. It is technology, and I just don't think large language models are any different. They're not this magic wand that are going to be able to, that you're going to wave and it's going to magically fix all of the issues that you've historically had. You still will have people and process issues that technology is not a solution to.
Interesting answer. Was that the answer you was expecting, Gabriel?
I don't know, but I mean, Stuart is the one who's read a 150-page document on AI, so I'll take his answer anytime.
Okay. Well, we are on the 45-minute mark. Gentlemen, thank you very much for that. I'm sure the audience found that insightful and hopefully helpful. We're going to close out now. There is on the screen a link to additional, or there was on the screen, a link to some additional resources for those that are interested. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation with ClearPeople, please get in touch. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Joe. It was really great
Thank
to have
you.
you on. Cheers,
Indeed.
guys.
Thank you all.
Yes.